everybody, and welcome to day 3 of the Egeria Dojo Live. We've got different experts from the Egeria community coming to join us today to give their perspective on on their experiences with Egeria and different types of roles. So the first session is going to be about becoming an advocate, and we have a number of people who have been working with Egeria and as advocates in other projects to talk about those experiences. After that, we're going to talk about being a maintainer, and we'll have maintainers from the community talking about their experiences. The next session is, and this is the final sort of taught session, is around the Egeria architecture. And so I'm going to take you through the architectural principles that were established right at the start of the project and how that's manifested into the way that Egeria is today. So those are our 3 main sessions. At the end of it, there'll be time if you want to join us for any questions or a sort of informal chat. That's what we have at the last session. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Moya, who is our top advocate on Egeria, to talk a little bit about being an advocate.
Okay, I'm going to just share a couple of slides actually to sort of help me stay focused on track. So I'll just sort of quickly share those. They're very brief and PowerPoint, let's go. There we go. Okay, so I think it's quite an interesting session to do this because I know when I joined Mandy and the team to focus on Egeria last year, I was there thinking, oh my gosh, all open source, it's going to be lots and lots of coding and I'm going to have to pick up my coding skills, which are quite atrocious as I've not done coding for sort of decades. And my role at the organization where I work is as an architect. So, you know, coming into the team where everyone's very much focused on coding, it was quite an interesting experience. But, you know, there's a lot more sort of goes on beyond the code, and it's very important to sort of consider these areas. And you know, Mandy and the team that contribute and maintain and have built Egeria, you know, it's everything they've put together is absolutely fabulous. But one of the things that's so important is to make sure people get to know about this. They can understand what it is, can find it, understand the context. And there are many ways that people will need to understand it. You know, there's the whole technical point of view with documentation, but then there's also sort of people we want to adopt it. And so we have to get a message of what the benefits are at high level. So there's lots of different ways that we can sort of socialize that information. So beyond the code, it's sort of, you know, how do we get that message out there? And actually, it's not just about advocates. There is more than advocates that we need and that can get involved who aren't necessarily coding. So I wanted to capture a little bit of this. And of course, we've got advocates, which are very important. I'll sort of talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been involved with and sort of done to help, you know, with Egeria and how I've sort of got messaging out and things like this. But there's also other things and other people that we can have sort of working on this. And of course, there's champions. And for me, I see very much sort of Mandy as a champion for Egeria. She's leading this. We've also got Ferd at ING Bank who promotes and champions Egeria again with throughout the bank. And again, the Linux Foundation. Then there's leaders within the Egeria community, you know. So, for example, we could think of Graham, who's done a lot of stuff with the type system and have led sort of elements of development, and Nigel, who's done, you know, a whole set of create a whole set of capabilities around sort of deploying and putting Egeria into Docker. So there's lots of different roles of how we can sort of spread this information out. So then we've got advocates, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And advocates, of course, will sort of promote Egeria and sort of actively, you know, discuss and raise awareness of the this particular open source initiative that we're talking about. And then, of course, there are supporters, people who are very pro this, but possibly don't spread the message as much. Then there's a greater majority of uninformed people and sort of opponents. It's quite an interesting thought that we have opponents. And of course, Egeria is open source, and there are very good reasons for Egeria being open source, as it's bringing an open standard, a sort of framework, and a set of capabilities, which is available freely, as this is open source. So, there will be opponents, because people will have their empires and will have a whole set of their own capabilities that they will be having as commercial offerings. And for advocates, for people like us, we have to sort of kind of reassure a lot of these opponents that Egeria isn't a threat. Egeria is a framework and is the standard to sort of build out many of those capabilities, to be able to enable those capabilities in those commercial products, to be able to share their metadata, and to do more with it. So it's all about sort of building out the ecosystem, and hopefully as an advocate, we're sort of ensuring some of those opponents become much friendlier to us. I just wanted to cover kind of that list. One of the things that's quite interesting about an advocate, because I was sort of, I thought I'll look advocate up before I sort of go and talk about it. But advocate, of course, has sort of come from more of a legal background, as a person who will sort of champion somebody else's cause and policy. And obviously, and when you go and actually sort of look at Wikipedia and things, there's a huge focus about the sort of the whole legal implication of this. But in terms of Egeria here, we're not looking at any legal concepts or whatever. We're looking at the whole promoting Egeria and ensuring people get to know about Egeria, and do so in a good light. So, Egeria Advocate, I'm going to sort of talk a little bit now about some of the things that I've been involved in. My current role, the organisation where I work, is at IBM, and I've been at IBM, I'm one of the squad leaders for the MVP program that we run, so building minimum viable products. So I still talk to IBM's customers, and I talk to colleagues, and of course IBM has many, many commercial offerings. But again, we also work extensively with open source. I mean, look at the Red Hat acquisition, and many of the technologies that we offer also have many open source capabilities put into them. So when I'm working on projects, data related projects, if there's governance involved, one of the things that we're actually doing is we're talking to Mandy's team and raising awareness internally within the organization about Egeria and how we can use the open source framework to complement the technologies that we have. And also sometimes, customers will come to us and we'll discuss things with them. And so again, with customers, if we're talking about governance, and perhaps we're talking maybe also about industry standards for glossaries. So as we have a whole pack of business glossaries that we have at IBM, and Egeria is a great way to sort of support those along with the Cloud Pak offerings that we've got. So just discussing, making people aware of these things, because IT, there are so many initiatives, so many products, so many standards, so many open source companies out there. We need people to sort of raise awareness of these things. So add it to the conversation as much as you can. Mention it on social media. It's always good. I mean, just before I came on the call, I sent out a tweet to sort of say, I'm about to go on the Egeria Dojo, and here's the link to all the information. But even if people don't make the call, they might go, oh, what's that? And have a look at it. So on LinkedIn, Twitter, and a variety of other channels, it's always good to share information and sort of discuss what we're working on. Spreading the word, and I think this is probably the biggest thing for me, is sort of blogs, papers, articles, webinars. I've put TV shows, but that could be a webinar, or it could just be appearing at a large event that has parts of it sort of shown or streamed on LinkedIn Live or on various other channels. But it's always interesting to get blogs. And I know when I first started writing blogs, I would sort of think, am I aiming this at the right audience? Will people be interested? Is it technical enough? And yes, it's very important to have technical blogs. And if you look at the blogs that Graham, Nigel, and David and Mandy sort of create, and you sort of compare them to mine, they're aimed at very different audiences, which is a great thing because, you know, it's not just making people aware in the technical, you know, very technical deep dive developer community who we will, you know, hope might come and help contribute and maintain Egeria, but it's also making sure people at the business level who are focused on dealing with the issues of governance and glossaries and, you know, maintaining the security of their applications are aware that something exists out there that can help them. So, you know, last year we ran a set of blogs on security that we ran with the Palisade team. And this was quite interesting because many people hadn't, you know, hadn't thought about looking at the context-based way we could apply security for different sort of data access policies. And so it was a new way of looking at something and looking at how we could drive that through metadata. So to share that technically is very important, but also to share that and the business implication that that will have is very important. So we need advocates who can go and sort of do that and tell the community about it. Then presenting on a topic. So I'm presenting on advocacy, but I keep going back to Egeria and talking about Egeria as I'm doing that. And then also finding uses for Egeria. So it's quite interesting when we did the security webinar. One of the things that we found some uses for and other capabilities we could build in to Egeria. So, you know, things around project management that we sort of discussed. So, you know, Egeria is quite a large framework and there are many areas and many directions you can go with governance. And, you know, Mandy and the team have got a release schedule that sort of indicates areas where they want to go. But there are many, many more areas that Egeria can go because data is so complex and there is so much metadata and so many uses for it. You know, even the stuff that we've done with virtualization, which I think will come back again and there'll be more to do with that. There's a variety of areas, so find uses for it. And how doing all these things are fabulous, but one of the things that's really good to do is to sort of get, of course, very involved with the team. And as Egeria is an open source initiative, this is fairly straightforward and very easy to do. And the team are fabulous. That, you know, they have frequent meetings. They're all very approachable and easy to work with. You know, they've got quite an active Slack channel. There's information you can find on LinkedIn, on Twitter. There's a series of videos that are out there. There's a whole YouTube channel for Egeria as well. So get involved. They're all very open to people sort of reaching out to them, especially through Slack. And quite often we'll see lots of people joining that Slack channel, asking questions and dialogue starting. So go through that and, you know, join the weekly WebEx call that happens. Get involved. And, you know, to get involved, you don't necessarily have to be coding. I mean, if you're wanting to be doing advocacy, finding out about the capabilities, then it's a really good starting point to sort of do that. I'm going to sort of pause at that point and see if there are any questions. Mandy, if there was anything else that you wanted me to cover that I've not mentioned.
Oh, I think there's loads of things, but do we have any questions coming through? Let me look.
I'll just mention for blogs, of course, if you're wanting to write a blog to get published on the Linux Foundation Egeria website, then of course you just need to submit that via the team. So you would need to get involved with Mandy and the guys and join the Slack channel to sort of work out the whole process for that. But, you know, blogs we can sort of put anywhere. They can go on Medium, they could go on LinkedIn, on your personal blog site. You know, and hashtag them so we can find them and see them.
I think one other question, sir. How do you know when you're being successful? What would you be looking for to determine whether what you're doing is making a difference?
I think the success is if you start getting feedback. So there's someone who pinged me last week on LinkedIn, which I need to discuss with you, Mandy, which is a good point for me to raise, was who was asking where do they find business partners that they can work with Egeria. So that's something I need to discuss with you to sort of pass that back. So when people start engaging with you and asking you questions, that's always a really good sign. If people leave comments on your blog, that's really good. And you know, last year we ran a very similar event to this, where we did a series of webinars, and the fact that people join these and they play them back, they listen to them, and you know, it's quite interesting because within IBM, you know, if people have got questions about metadata and governance, not necessarily Egeria, I quite often will get lots of messages on Slack about that, and as you will, I'm sure yourself. So it's when people start having a dialogue with you, and you know, if you have a blog, you can see when people are reading it, and yes, and you get comments back on them, or maybe retweets.
Okay. So, any questions for Moya?
This is Susan. Can some of the hashtags and so on be listed in the chat, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, most of the ones I use, it just normally reflect what we're doing or whatever. So I normally just would put Egeria down as a hashtag. Today I put Dojo. Um, I might put webinar down as well, but just think about what people might be searching on. So, you know, it might be data governance, might be lineage, which is, you know, a big focus for ING. And so when people are in things like the Twitter, if they're searching for something, they'll just type in a word. So just think, if I was interested in finding out about governance, what would I type in? And if it's going to be governance or lineage or metadata, you know, just keep, there needs to be one word. Then you know, put that in. And if it's multiple words, then they'll be all squished together. So yeah, just have a think about how you would yourself search for the topic you're trying to advertise, and that's the words that you need to be putting down as hashtags. But just a couple of them, don't need too many. And I was going to make another point, but I've just completely it's disappeared now.
That's okay. That's okay. All right. So maybe we'll go on to somebody else. So Annie, I don't know whether you want to give some of your thoughts on this process.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Moya, it struck home when you said made a comment about, you know, not having coded in a long time, and certainly that was my case in first getting involved with Egeria. I'm not with IBM any longer, but for a large part of the last 5 years, I was a member of the information server team, and primarily focused on all of information governance and metadata management, and especially data lineage. And so that attracted me to the efforts that Mandy was championing, and of course the whole wonderful team, and ditto to everyone's openness and availability. But I knew that I wasn't in a position to, you know, go back and start crawling into the code. But because this whole concept is something I was hearing from customers, and still hear from customers all the time, of, you know, how do I figure out this mix of metadata across vendors and across technologies? It's just a problem that we're just hearing louder and louder and louder from everywhere. So it was an issue that was coming up at every single customer. And a lot of times I was out in the field implementing glossaries and implementing lineage. And so the place I felt like I could contribute was merely as a sounding board initially, adding thoughts when David first did lots of work to create a glossary model, and adding, you know, thought input to it from that perspective. But then, you know, quickly saw that my role could be more appropriate, as you had noted, to give people confidence that this Egeria effort was real. I would say that in talking to customers, perhaps most of all, meeting up with their architects and technical folks who weren't programmers, but they're very, very technical in their realm. And, they would maybe read something about Egeria or hear about it early on and want to know if it was a significant effort, even if they weren't able to join any of the calls. So giving them some comfort that it was significant and real, which would happen in ad hoc conversations with architects at these particular sites, and also with governance specialists who were trying to resolve these conflicts within their organizations. And so it kind of branched out. It started out with just being a engaged person in meetings to talk about what was happening with Egeria. But it led also to blogging. It led to presentations where I could hopefully make the team more scalable when they couldn't be in 7 places at once, and there was a conference that needed a presenter. So John from ODPI and I did some presentations together. But I think the blogging is also a really significant one, where either blogging about some of the efforts that were going on and developments, or putting demos on my blog and then out on YouTube, especially early on, so people could understand kind of how Egeria was working. I did some animations that kind of illustrated, how does this actually flow when we created a repository proxy for Egeria, and what do these things actually look like, and how do the Kafka messages go back and forth? And people who are sort of deeply into the governance concept, they want to know that it's not just a black box. It's not all just hidden from them, and they're not necessarily ready to crawl into the code, but they want to actually pictorially see what's happening. And so constructing some YouTube demos and putting on my blog turned out to be a real positive way to spread that message. And ditto to what you said about feedback. I think that the attendance at different presentations, but also just the comments in the blogs and places has been a significant way to see that it was a positive contribution. And still trying to do that now. I mean, I'm now at a vendor who our whole lifeblood is data lineage, and that's a narrower part of Egeria, but it's still something very important to us. And we're much smaller. I'm working hard to get the resources that we can contribute, but also see what you brought up before and Mandy brought up before, is for people not to feel threatened by Egeria, but to start to see how Egeria can help them as well, so that it's something that helps all sort of parties within the community, not just, large companies that are looking for a, magic wand to share metadata. So it's a work in progress, but, trying to advocate on all sides, I think, is a role that we play.
Super. Any questions for Annie? Or any additional thoughts as people are talking? No. John, do you want to have a step in at this moment?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was double muted there. And apologies, I was having technical difficulties joining in, so I got it a few minutes late. I don't know if I've had too much to add on top of what everyone's saying. I guess the only thing that I will say is that ecosystem development, which, is being an advocate, is probably one of the hardest things for an open source project and one of the most important ones, and frankly will end up defining the success and failure of it, even so much more than the code. You can have the most amazing code base, you can have the most high performant, most technically sound, most hitting the use cases. But if nobody knows about it, the project dies on the vine. So it's a critical part of any project. And even though, one might coming into it might think, oh, geez, I'm not putting that much of a contribution. Like, how am I helping? You're helping immensely by doing this, because if these things aren't written down, if these things aren't communicated, if these things aren't advocated, nobody will use them, or it'll be really hard for somebody to use them. So I guess +1ing to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And do you want to talk a little bit about the work that the Linux Foundation does to support us?
Yeah, I mean, what we try to do is we try to put staffing in place well, I guess a couple of things here. One is just on vendor neutral infrastructure, because one of I think the biggest challenges of an open source project is you need to talk about it within the context, not the context of any one vendor, but in the context of the technology. So we try to, number one, put like a separation of space in place, so that when you're talking on behalf of the Egeria project, yes, you might be an IBM employee, but you're talking on behalf of a project and not an IBM product or initiative or something along those lines. So I say just the distancing is sort of the one. Two is the staffing. So ODPI has Chris Blum, who's a contractor that works with ODPI, and a lot of her role is to help take the content and the advocacy work that is raw that you're doing, and help package it and make it great for the larger, wider audience. And so just simple things like, managing blog channels, managing social channels, helping in the background with events, particularly these days, virtual events. It doesn't look like we're going to be in person for a long time here yet. There's a lot of that work there, and also just being keen on what precisely is that message that we tend to try to really focus on. The Linux Foundation is not going to all be the subject matter experts. Folks like you all are going to be that, but the more that we can help you take your message to a broader audience, and at the same token position it in such a way that it's not coming off in a more corporate sense, but it's coming off from the community sense. Those are the things that helps also attract people to the project. I mean, we see projects that kind of hit a ceiling when it's very corporate led. When it becomes in a vendor neutral context, all of a sudden that ceiling's removed, because people see a chance that, hey, I have a place that I can participate. I have a way that I can help contribute to this project. I have a way that I can, understand, where this is going. There's a term that John Mark Walters had put out, software supply chain, that I think is a really, really interesting one here. People who are wanting to use this technology want to have investors so they have an understanding of where it's going, and they're not just at the whim of a vendor. And that's part of that is being able to participate heavily in the community. And that advocate role is the key one at the top. And then we try to help make sure that the space created stays vendor neutral so that the communication and collaboration can still happen. So I don't know, maybe if that's helpful for this group here.
It's helpful. That was what I was hoping to hear. So maybe some of the other people who are on the call.
That's up to date.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment, hi John, and always good to hear you sort of talking about this sort of stuff. But I think one of the things that's really interesting is, of course, the Linux Foundation facilitate us being able to sort of be social and to be able to sort of get the message out about Egeria and help us with putting the blogs up there. But one of the things I think is really quite interesting, that I've found really interesting, because I've written blogs as an employee for an organisation, but also for Egeria, and also done sort of advocacy for Egeria. And I think it's quite interesting because you haven't got a marketing team, you haven't got someone who's co-authoring blogs with you or whatever, or who's sort of going through and sort of tidying your blogs up or whatever, or a marketing team of professionals who actually write the blogs or anything. All the blogs that we put out as an open source group are all very authentic and come either from using the product, experiencing the product, seeing how it impacts different situations, from the actual sort of developers themselves. And I find the advocacy when we're doing that through Egeria with open source is some ways is very authentic and very sort of realistic, because it doesn't go through sort of a sort of sanity tech channel. And so maybe they're a bit more rough and ready, our blogs or our advocacy or whatever, but I think it's quite an interesting thing. So the advocacy is actually very much down to the advocates, and it's a fabulous thing to be an advocate. You can become sort of recognized as an Egeria contributor, isn't it, Mandy? I think once you've become an advocate, and so you can become officially recognized and sort of achieve an advocacy badge for Egeria, which is lovely, and because the maintainers and have badges as well. So it's nice to have something that you can sort of stick on your profile in LinkedIn or Twitter, or sort of say about these things. But again, the blogs and the advocacy that comes out, because it is open source and it's down to the individuals to get involved in this, it's quite interesting. I think it makes it a little bit more sort of personal in some ways. So, and different, because you do have to drive it yourself. So you have to be sort of quite keen and enthusiastic in the first place. It's not just part of your day job. You're doing this because you're contributing to open source, and you feel some sort of need in your life or whatever to sort of get involved in this. So I think I think it's a really good thing. It's a really interesting thing, and it's also probably a bit closer or whatever, and more I don't know, I find I get a bit more from doing the blogs for Egeria sometimes. Does that make sense? I'll ask Mandy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And this is really because I spend a lot of time on the code and leading the team, and this is the bit that I don't have the bandwidth to do. So I'm so grateful to anybody who really picks this up and runs with it.
Yeah. And everyone has different skills, so some people find it easier, but even if it's a challenge, people are always keen to consume information. So even if it's not a sort of thing you do naturally, then it's still a good thing to sort of share the information, or even if it's just co-writing a blog. And so that's a very good thing to do. So if you don't feel confident about doing a blog yourself or doing these things, then share the idea, and there's probably someone else who's in the team who'd be happy to sort of work with you to sort of push that out. I don't know if there are any more questions for John.
Or any other comments? Any other, around the whole idea of being an advocate.
I was interested to hear that around what John was saying around open source projects sort of living and dying based on their advocacy. I'm wondering, I'm just wondering about how we know that, and how what the evidence base is for projects that succeed because of the advocacy, as opposed to some other way of getting the information out. So I'm just curious about, because if we get some insight as to that, well, maybe we could make an effort to, maybe there's an optimum number between coding and advocacy, I wonder.
That's an excellent question. What I would say for us, the always poster child example that we put together is OpenStack versus Apache Cloud Stack, because both of these projects were launched at roughly the same time. Actually, OpenStack was just a touch later. Both of them are basically in the same space. ironically enough, Apache Cloud Stack was actually the better technology, as most people evaluated it. I personally didn't. This is sort of the hearsay that I hear from others. Yet, how much about Apache Cloud Stack do you hear about today versus OpenStack? How many commercial deployments are of OpenStack versus Apache Cloud Stack? And I think things like that, examples like that, and I think, David, it can be really difficult to exactly measure it because, technology's coming at points in time, where you're at of the maturity model of a project, all of that are variables to a degree. But I think if we're looking at an area where two cars basically started at the same time and we're watching them go through time, the one that has the ecosystem, the one that has the advocates out there, those advocates that are helping bring people into the platform, the people helping people work through the platform, the evidence we see is with projects that invest in that area. And I use the term invest loosely, not necessarily a dollar thing. It's more of just a time thing. If they have people in the community that are, they're paying attention. They're the ones that have dug into the technology earlier and they're trying to make sense of it. That's the pattern that we start to see. And I think the Apache Cloud Stack OpenStack one is probably at least the best example of a what one would true is a true scientific A/B test of that. I don't know, David, if that helps at least answer part of your question. I know there was another question you had on sort of making sure you had the right number of allocations both ways. Does that help, at least the first part?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Are they advocates about their advocacy methods within that team? I mean, there's some way, if there's a way of doing good advocacy that we've seen in that group, do they push the sort of way that they've done things, or is that? I'm thinking that this group in Egeria is actually thinking that we want to take advocacy seriously. We want to give it credit. So I think we're hoping to follow that route where we honour and recognise and give credit to advocates where potentially it's not that obvious, unless you think about it in the community, how you would give credit to those advocates. Whereas easy to measure lines of code in GitHub, but it's less easy to measure potentially. I know there is the digital history of things, but it's not in one place, is it?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to see a couple of different, at least with that group, there's a couple of different angles that one could see happen there. I mean, on the first forefront is just, the blogging, the, being on social, the kind of the forward leading of just showing examples of what you're doing and how it's worked for you, and, rough edges you might have ran along the way and things like that, it's not just a marketing fluff piece, but it's a real actual piece of this is how I got it working. These were the challenges I ran into. I wrote this down, so next time I do it, I don't forget. I was trying to do something unique in how it turned out. But then I think also the other is people just very actively managing incoming channels. So mailing lists. I think OpenStack has some forums available, channels like that. And trying to answer people's questions, but at the same time, use that as a way to then catalog what are the common things coming up. Is that something that needs to get rolled back into the project itself? And maybe that's an invitation for the person making those comments to get involved in the project, to say, hey, this seems to be, something you're pretty well versed in, or I've created an issue around it, or maybe encourage them to create an issue around it and use that as sort of an entry point for them to get more deeply involved under the project. Some people will take the bait, and they'll be great for it. I mean, that's one of the fun challenges sometimes that with open source projects is people will kind of sit a little bit on the sidelines, not because they're not technically capable, but they aren't sure of what the dynamics of the group are. And if they're invited in through a channel like that, they become they become really interested. They start, paying attention. They start spending time here, and then that doubles down, and then that spreads out either your developer, your advocacy base over time. With all of these little individuals that keep coming in, and they bring in the next wave of people, and sort of that, cycle keeps continuing. But then also these advocates are the ones that are out there helping build out other documentation pieces. They might be seeing enough, things within the community happening or common issues that they say, okay, well, it's not necessarily a product issue, but maybe it just needs to get written down. And so you see them starting to build, some of these bits up. These are the people that are out there forward speaking at events. They're doing, conferences, virtual events, doing webinars, things like that. So there's a lot of really broad touch points that you'll see there. I think probably to one of your earlier points, there probably needs to be a little bit of balance. So projects have to be careful to not be too advocacy heavy versus development, because then, you're creating a bigger fire hose at the front end, and the back end, has trouble picking up. But the same token, I think you can in open source, if you have somebody that's willing to write, you never turn them away, because that is the hardest thing to find. So it tends not to be as much of a problem of getting too heavy on advocacies to developers, at least for what I've seen. It's a very, very rare problem to have. But you can use that advocacy group as the ones to also help bring in more developers, more contributors, and sort of helping bring, feed other areas of the project. That these people sometimes they just need to add it in, and an advocate can sort of help be that bridge, which is, I think, also something we've seen in some, successful projects that really get strong advocacies. Is those people they're not just a one-way blowhorn, but they're also a bridge to bring other people in, and they're a bridge to help get other groups and communities in, and they're also a bridge to some of the developers that may not be going out and speaking with a lot of the community and helping bring pieces in. So I don't know, David, I might have taken your question a little bit off the range there, but was that a helpful answer? Did I kind of hit on your points?
I think, yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you.
No problem. I apologize. I can ramble about this stuff all day. So if I get a little bit too worried, just hit my mic and cut me off.
No, I mean, a lot of people don't see the tremendous professional organisation that is behind an open source project. So there's the projects where people are publishing source and people pick it up by accident. But when you want to take something that you want people to invest their product, their company, their profession, their career in, then we need to be very professional. That's one of the reasons why we invest so much in the security, the quality of the code and things. But this aspect of it is also critical, because anybody who invests in Egeria is investing in the ecosystem, and we need to protect that investment as much as we protect the investment in the code. So this whole bigger ecosystem that certainly for me has been fascinating to learn about as I've been more and more deeply involved in, firstly, Egeria, and then the ODPI and the Linux Foundation beyond it. So yeah, I think it's really important to understand that this is just so much more than code.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is.
Shame. What a shame.
I know. If we have to do marketing once in a while. And actually, we even hate to use the word marketing in a lot of our projects. We've been using more of the term outreach, which I think really connects more to it, because we're not trying to sell someone on something. We're trying to, get to the people that are already touching this, or get to the people that we think this is relevant for, and help almost support them, in one way or another. And that can take a lot of different angles. It's not just like address all their bugs, but, also help connect them with other users. Also, help connect them with people that are having the similar use cases, help connect them back into the development and participate in that. Yeah, there's an interesting sort of human angle that we see kind of pop up in open source, sometimes good, sometimes bad, where people see these projects as an area to belong. And the more that we can kind of help create that space, the project community ends up really flourishing over time. As long as you get the right people there and it doesn't go sideways on you. But we try to be very hopeful. Did I lose everyone's audio or?
No. You've left us think thoughtful is actually the real thing.
Okay. Okay. I was worried I lost everyone there. I tried to throw a joke in at the end, but nobody caught on it, or everybody's laughing at me. That's fine.
No, that's fine. No. So yeah. So any other questions or thoughts? As I say, you got me thinking about things. So that's why I didn't answer. So any other thoughts or comments about being an advocate? So Moya mentioned the contributors badge, and one of the things that we do recognise, I think I got the badges in here, is that we do have a contributors badge, and we also recognise our contributors on our website. The contributors badge, as I say, it's just really one of the maintainers will recognize your work and say, yeah, this person has made a number of very valuable contributions. And as I say, it's not just code, it is the advocacy, all that sort of thing. And if you feel like you've done a lot as a contributor, give one of us a prompt and say, hey, could you nominate me for a contributor badge? And this is what it looks like. It's a nice picture of Egeria with the contributor, and the badge is publicly recognised on the Acclaim site, and it's something that you can include in your mail closing information, in your LinkedIn profile, or anywhere you choose. That's the value of this, and obviously it's not tied to any employer; it's tied entirely to you and your contributions to the project. Right. So anything else we should be talking about around being an advocate?
Do you, this is Susan, do you want me to say anything about, I can say a few words as well and share something.
Absolutely, yes. Let me stop sharing, let you take over.
Okay, all right. So what I'll do is share this blog that I just been writing while the call, I've been editing while the call has been ongoing. So let me share. So I've been working on this blog mainly to share, or let me put the link again in the chat because you can all go and see it. Let's do that. So it's mainly for people to find the materials from today and yesterday and the day before. So day 1, day 2, day 3. I explain where the Slack is and where the agenda is for the dojo, and there's the agenda diagram. I also, while you were all speaking, added a picture about advocacy from Moya's presentation. And I also added a section, which I'm going to call, I'll start editing it now in front of you, lessons learned. And I was hoping you will help with the advocacy and by helping me complete the lessons learned section now collaboratively. So let's just do that together. So because this is a kind of advocacy in itself. So I think we had about 35 different people on the last few days. We had, I think, a maximum of 28, the low of 13. And I'll put including the instructors. Now, do I have all the countries represented? So I've noted that we have Canada, India, Morocco, UK, US. Are there any other countries? Okay, no other countries. You can put in the chat. And at least four people were able to complete pull requests during the session.
Yes.
Or did were there any more? Do you think it was about right? About 4?
Yes, 4 was good.
Yes. Okay. And then the lessons learned was that day 1 could have been split into 2 days, and days 2 could be combined. If there are any other lessons learned, that would be awesome. And I'll just tell a little story. I think 2 of the people in this session maybe joined because they saw my LinkedIn entry. Can they confirm that? If they don't want to speak, they can confirm that in the chat. Two of the people, did they join because they saw a LinkedIn entry from me or a tweet? Because I can't think of any other way that they would have known. No? Yes, from LinkedIn. You see, so that I just wanted to tell this story. So and I think one of them is one of the people who completed a pull request. Oh, was that, what does the second one say? Oh, from Spain. Oh, we can add a Spain. Thank you. Yes. So this just so this is just a live confirmation of advocacy. You have someone on Egeria who joined these 3 days because they saw my LinkedIn post.
Great.
So that just sort of sums it up. And I think the folks, I know the people also because as they were following my LinkedIn, I assume because I had met them at an advocacy event for Call for Code and Women in Data Science and activities like that. Can you just confirm that was where we met at an advocacy event? Yes. Okay. All right. Very good. So, Mandy, I just wanted to close with that. So you have new people coming in through advocacy, which was not actually related to Egeria, but just advocacy around technology.
Yeah, that's super.
And then through a LinkedIn entry. So I'll just stop there. If you have any more countries or items to add to the blog, and I'm just going to now tweet and post another LinkedIn entry about the blog, and I'll try and mention some of you in it. So if you can do some advocacy yourselves. So I'm done. That was what I wanted to share, Mandy.
That's lovely. That's lovely. So we've got advocacy ongoing even within the project, even within the advocacy session. So super.
Yes, exactly. That was the other point. You can always be doing advocacy. It doesn't matter. It's always you can. And I will mention something that I felt maybe wasn't focused on in the earlier. I think it's very important to nurture people. And so when you have people around you who are new, you need to keep going. You don't wait for them to come to you and ask for help. You go to them and offer help. That's very important. So the word nurture is I think key in advocacy as well. So that's an element that is particularly important if you want people to be truly engaged. And that's my finale.
And that's a good, I think that's a good topic. It's a good point to end on. So,
Okay.
that's superb. The point about nurture. It's funny because I always have a view that you know, we have to have code in order for people to have something to run and something to talk about. But it is a journey. It's actually not having the finished code that's important. It's the journey and the conversations, and you know, not just around the code that works. I mean, we had an amazing call this morning discussing the enablement of Egeria to a new level of so that it runs secure by default rather than having to turn it on. And that was an excellent example of different people's skills coming together to create our answer, our plan, that individually we would not have come up with such a rich and well thought through idea. So to me, this broader community and the way that people can collaborate from different environments and different skills is one of the most fascinating parts of open source work, and its power. People who are not aware of open source have no idea of the power that it can bring. So I certainly didn't 3 years ago when I started this.
Great. Okay. Should we stop recording now, Mandy, for the end of this session, or?
Yes, I think we should, and we then should take a small break, maybe 15 minutes to allow people just to have a coffee and things like that, and then we'll go into the maintainer session.
Okay, so 15 minutes past the hour, or 45 minutes past the hour if you're in India.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody okay for everybody? We'll talk in 15 minutes. Take care.